I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped out of my garage and saw Brenda Patterson standing on my front porch, her perfectly manicured hands wrapped around my black rubber boot tray like it was evidence in a murder trial. It was the first week of February in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the snow had been relentless for 3 days straight. The kind of wet, heavy snow that turns into gray slush the moment anyone steps on it. My wife Sarah and I had just moved into Meadowbrook Estates 6 months ago, lured by the promise of well-maintained streets and friendly neighbors. What the realtor failed to mention was that the Homeowners Association president was a woman who treated the neighborhood bylaws like they were handed down from Mount Sinai. "Excuse me," I called out, my boots crunching through the packed snow on my driveway. "Can I help you with something?" Brenda turned around with that expression I had come to know too well in our short time living here. Her lips were pursed so tight they looked like a drawstring bag, and her eyes narrowed behind her designer glasses. She was wearing a cream-colored peacoat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her highlighted blonde hair was styled in that aggressive bob that seemed to be the unofficial uniform of HOA presidents everywhere. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "I am helping you. This unauthorized item has been cluttering your front porch for weeks now, and according to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines, no outdoor items may be left visible on front porches except for approved seasonal decorations." I stared at her, then at the boot tray in her hands. It was just a simple black rubber tray, the kind you can buy at any hardware store for $15. Sarah and I kept it by the front door so we would not track snow and slush through our house. Revolutionary concept, apparently. "Brenda, that's just a boot tray. Everyone in Minnesota has one. It's literally designed to catch melting snow so it does not ruin your floors." "Everyone in Minnesota does not live in Meadowbrook Estates," she replied, already turning to walk down my porch steps. "This is a premium community with standards to maintain. I will be disposing of this properly." "Wait, you cannot just take my property," I said, following her down the steps. "That's theft." She paused at the bottom of my driveway, still clutching my boot tray. "This is not theft, Mr. Lancaster. This is enforcement of community standards. You signed the HOA agreement when you purchased your home. You agreed to follow these rules." I agreed to reasonable rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. "I did not agree to let you steal items from my porch." Brenda's face flushed pink, which clashed terribly with her maroon scarf. "I am not stealing anything. I am confiscating a violation. You will receive a formal notice by mail within 3 business days, along with a fine of $50 for the infraction, and another $25 for requiring HOA intervention." Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and marched toward her white Mercedes SUV parked at the curb. I watched in disbelief as she opened the rear door and tossed my boot tray onto what looked like pristine white leather seats. She climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and drove off down the snow-covered street. I stood there in the cold, my breath forming clouds in the winter air, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah appeared at the front door, wrapped in her thick cardigan. "Was that Brenda?" she called out. "Yeah, she just stole our boot tray." "She what?" I walked back up the porch steps, my boots leaving wet marks on the wood. "She took it. Said it was a violation of the HOA rules. We are getting fined $75. Sarah's dark eyes widened. "You have got to be kidding me. Jake, that woman is insane. We need that tray. Do you know how much of a mess we are going to track in without it?" "Trust me, I know." I stepped inside and immediately felt my boots squelch against the hardwood floor, Melted snow and gray slush dripped from my soles, creating little puddles. See, this is exactly why we had the tray. Sarah grabbed some towels from the hallway closet and threw one at me. This is ridiculous. What are we supposed to do, leave our boots outside in the snow? They will freeze solid. Apparently, that's preferable to offending Brenda's delicate aesthetic sensibilities. For the rest of that day, I could not stop thinking about the audacity of what had happened. I spent an hour that evening reading through the entire HOA agreement, all 47 pages of dense legal language. Section 12 did mention restrictions on items left on front porches, but the language was vague enough that it could mean almost anything. There was nothing specifically about boot trays or practical winter items. The next morning, I was scheduled to head into the office early for a meeting. I worked as a project manager for a construction company, and we had a big presentation for a potential client. I left the house at 6:30 when it was still dark outside. The temperature had dropped overnight, and a fresh dusting of snow covered everything. When I came home that evening around 7, Sarah met me at the door with her phone in her hand. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a photo. "The neighbors are talking about it in the community Facebook group." The image on her screen made my jaw drop. It was a picture of Brenda's front entryway, but I barely recognized it. Her normally immaculate foyer, which I had seen once during a mandatory HOA meeting she hosted last fall, was destroyed. The white carpet that ran from her front door through the hallway was covered in dark, muddy tracks. Not just a few footprints, but a trail of filth that looked like someone had walked back and forth through a swamp. "What happened?" I asked. Sarah scrolled to the comments. "According to 3 different neighbors, Brenda came home from somewhere yesterday around 4 in the afternoon. She was carrying your boot tray from her car. They said she was so focused on getting inside that she walked straight through her house with her wet boots on. Tracked slush everywhere, on her white carpet." I started laughing. I could not help it. The image was too perfect. Brenda Patterson, the woman who had confiscated my boot tray because it offended her sense of community aesthetics, had destroyed her own carpet because she did not have anywhere to put her wet boots. "Wait, where was she coming from that her boots were that wet?" I asked. Sarah shrugged. "Someone said they saw her car parked at the community center earlier. She must have been walking around in the slush out there. The parking lot always floods when the snow melts." The irony was almost too much. I pulled out my phone and requested to join the Meadowbrook Estates Facebook group. Within an hour, my request was approved and I could see the full conversation. The comments were brutal. "Maybe if she had a boot tray, this would not have happened," one neighbor wrote. "I heard she confiscated Jake Lancaster's tray yesterday. Karma works fast," another added. "She fined me $50 last month for having a wreath up past January 15th. "I have zero sympathy," wrote someone named Patricia Holden. The comments went on and on. It became clear that Brenda had been terrorizing the neighborhood with petty fines and violations for years. People were fed up, and this incident was the perfect ammunition. That night, Sarah and I sat at our kitchen table and I drafted an email to Brenda. I kept it professional but firm. I explained that she had taken my property without permission, that I wanted it returned immediately, and that I would not be paying the fine because I believed the rule was being misapplied. I cited the specific language in Section 12 and pointed out that a boot tray was a practical necessity during Minnesota winters, not a decorative violation. I sent the email at 9:45. By 10:30, I had a response. "Mr. Lancaster, your email has been received and noted. However, my decision stands. The boot tray was a violation, and the fine will remain in place. If you wish to contest this, You may present your case at the next HOA board meeting on February 22nd. The confiscated item has been disposed of according to protocol. Regards, Brenda Patterson, HOA President. Disposed of. I read the line 3 times. She had thrown away my boot tray. Not just confiscated it, but actually thrown it away. That crossed a line from petty enforcement into actual theft and destruction of property. She threw it away, I told Sarah, showing her the email. Can she do that? I do not think so. I mean, HOAs have a lot of power, but they cannot just destroy people's belongings. Sarah leaned back in her chair. So what are you going to do? I am going to that board meeting. And I am going to make sure everyone knows exactly what she did. The next 2 weeks crawled by. I bought a new boot tray, but this time I kept it just inside the door instead of on the porch. It was less convenient, but I was not about to give Brenda another excuse to harass me. Meanwhile, the Facebook group continued to buzz with activity. More neighbors started sharing their own stories of Brenda's overreach. Tom Henderson from Maple Drive posted about getting fined because his garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though his garage door had accidentally jammed open and he was waiting for a repair person. Monica Price from Oakwood Circle shared a notice she received threatening a lien on her property because her mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The neighborhood was simmering with resentment. A woman named Jennifer Wu, who lived 2 streets over, sent me a private message through Facebook. She explained that she was an attorney specializing in property law and that she had been wanting to challenge Brenda's authority for months. She asked if I would be willing to let her accompany me to the board meeting. I have been collecting documentation on HOA overreach for the past year, she wrote. Your situation might be the perfect case to demonstrate a pattern of abuse. Would you be interested in discussing this further? I called her that evening. Jennifer was sharp and direct. She explained that while HOAs did have legal authority to enforce community standards, they had to do so reasonably and within the bounds of the law. Confiscating and destroying personal property without due process was almost certainly illegal. Even if the boot tray was technically a violation, which I do not think it was, she had no right to throw it away, Jennifer said. At minimum, she should have given you written notice and an opportunity to remove it yourself. What she did was conversion, which is the civil equivalent of theft. So what can I do about it? Well, you could sue her personally, or you could sue the HOA. But honestly, I think the better approach is to use this as leverage to change the way the HOA operates. From what I have seen, Brenda has been abusing her position for years. She is probably costing people thousands of dollars in bogus fines. If we can demonstrate a pattern of behavior, we might be able to get her removed from the board. The idea appealed to me. I did not really care about the $15 boot tray or even the $75 fine. What bothered me was the principle. Brenda was bullying people because she could, and nobody had ever stood up to her. I am in, I said. What do you need from me? Just show up to the meeting and tell your story. I will handle the rest. February 22nd arrived with another snowstorm. The meeting was held at the community center, a bland brick building near the front entrance of the neighborhood. I arrived 15 minutes early with Sarah and Jennifer. The meeting room was already packed. I counted at least 40 people, which was apparently triple the normal attendance. Brenda sat at the front of the room behind a folding table, flanked by 2 other board members I vaguely recognized. Her expression when she saw the crowd was priceless. The confidence she usually wore like armor seemed to crack, just a little. The meeting started with standard business. Reports on snow removal contracts, updates on landscaping plans for spring, discussion of the community pool maintenance schedule. Brenda's voice droned on in that self-important tone she loved so much. Finally, after 30 minutes of tedious updates, she opened the floor for homeowner comments. I raised my hand immediately. Brenda's eyes landed on me and her jaw tightened. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, her voice clipped, "please keep your comments brief." I stood up and turned so I could address both the board and the assembled neighbors. 3 weeks ago, Brenda Patterson came onto my property and took a boot tray from my front porch. She claimed it was a violation of HOA rules. When I asked for it back, she told me she had thrown it away. She also fined me $75 for having the tray in the first place. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people nodded. I saw Tom Henderson lean over and whisper something to his wife. "I have reviewed the HOA agreement," I continued. Section 12, paragraph 4 mentions restrictions on decorative items left on porches. A boot tray is not decorative. It is a practical necessity during Minnesota winters to prevent property damage from melted snow. Brenda confiscated and destroyed my personal property without giving me any opportunity to address the alleged violation. I believe that was illegal, and I am here tonight to demand both an apology and a refund of the fine. The murmurs grew louder. Brenda's face had gone from pink to red. She held up a hand. "Mr. Lancaster, you signed an agreement to abide by community standards. The board has the authority to enforce those standards as we see fit. If you did not want to follow the rules, you should not have moved to Meadowbrook Estates." "I am happy to follow reasonable rules," I shot back, "but confiscating property is not reasonable. It is theft." "It is not theft when it is done in the course of legitimate HOA enforcement." Jennifer stood up. "Actually, Miss Patterson, it is. My name is Jennifer Wu, and I am a property attorney. What you did constitutes conversion under Minnesota law. You took and destroyed Mr. Lancaster's property without due process. The fact that you are the HOA president does not give you the right to violate state law." Brenda's eyes widened slightly. She had not expected a lawyer to show up. "The HOA bylaws clearly state, the HOA bylaws do not supersede state law," Jennifer interrupted. "You cannot contract away someone's legal rights. Even if the boot tray was a violation, which is debatable given that Section 12 specifically references decorative items, you were required to give written notice and an opportunity to cure before taking any action. You did neither. You simply took the property and destroyed it." The room erupted. People started shouting questions and comments. I saw Patricia Holden stand up, waving a stack of papers. "I have been fined 4 times in the last year," she yelled. $200 total for things like leaving my garage door open and having a garden hose visible from the street. This is ridiculous." Tom Henderson stood up next. "I got fined for my garbage cans being visible when my garage door was broken." I explained the situation, but Brenda did not care. More people stood. The room devolved into chaos, with neighbors shouting over each other about their grievances. Brenda tried to restore order by banging a gavel on the table, but nobody paid attention. The 2 board members sitting next to her looked uncomfortable and kept exchanging glances. Finally, one of them, a gray-haired man named Robert Chen, held up both hands and stood. "Everyone, please, let us take a moment here." The room gradually quieted down. Robert turned to Brenda. "Brenda, I think we need to address these concerns seriously. This is clearly not just about Mr. Lancaster's boot tray. A lot of people are upset." "They are upset because they do not want to follow the rules," Brenda snapped. "Or maybe the rules are being enforced too harshly," Robert replied. His tone was gentle but firm. "I have to admit, I was not aware of many of these fines until tonight. Brenda, You have been handling most of the day-to-day enforcement yourself. Maybe we need to revisit our approach." The third board member, a younger woman named Amanda Foster, nodded. "I agree. Some of these fines seem excessive." Brenda looked like she had been slapped. "I have been protecting the property values of this community. If we let people do whatever they want, this neighborhood will turn into a slum." "A boot tray does not make something a slum," I said. "It makes it a home where people actually live." Several people applauded. Brenda's face was now a deep shade of crimson that clashed with her pink blouse. She gathered her papers and stood abruptly. "If this board does not support my efforts to maintain standards, then perhaps I should resign." It was clearly meant to be a power move, a threat designed to make everyone back down. But instead of protests, the room fell silent. Then someone in the back called out, "Okay." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Brenda looked stunned. Robert and Amanda exchanged another glance, and I could see them both suppressing smiles. "Brenda," Robert said carefully, "maybe we should all take some time to cool down and reconvene next month. We can discuss enforcement policies and procedures then." But Brenda was already shoving her papers into her designer handbag. "I've given 3 years to this community. 3 years of my time dealing with people who do not appreciate what I do. Fine. You want to let the neighborhood fall apart? Go ahead." She stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. The moment the door slammed behind her, the room erupted into applause and cheers. Robert looked shell-shocked but also relieved. He adjourned the meeting, promising that the board would review all recent fines and enforcement actions. As people filed out, at least a dozen neighbors came up to thank me. Patricia Holden hugged me. Tom Henderson shook my hand so enthusiastically I thought my arm might fall off. Jennifer looked satisfied. "That went better than I expected," she said. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now the board will probably try to clean up the mess Brenda made. I would expect they will refund most of these bogus fines and implement some better oversight procedures. As for your boot tray situation, I think you can safely say you won." Sarah linked her arm through mine as we walked to the car. "I cannot believe she actually quit." "I do not think she meant to," I said. "I think she expected everyone to beg her to stay." "Well, she read that room wrong." We drove home through the snowy streets, and for the first time since moving to Meadowbrook Estates, I felt like maybe we had made the right decision after all. Not because of the HOA, but because when it mattered, the neighbors had come together. But the story did not end there. 3 days later, I was working from home when Sarah called me from the living room. Her voice was urgent. "Jake, you need to see this right now." I walked in to find her staring at her phone, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. She turned the screen toward me. It was another post in the neighborhood Facebook group, but this one was different. It was from Monica Price, and it included several photographs. The photos showed Brenda's house, specifically her front porch and walkway. Someone had dumped dozens of boot trays all over her property. They were piled on the steps, lined up along the walkway, and even arranged to spell out words on her lawn. The snow made everything clearly visible. "Oh no," I said. "Oh yes," Sarah replied. "Monica posted this about 20 minutes ago. Apparently, someone did this overnight." Brenda called the police. I scrolled through the comments. The neighbors were split between finding it hilarious and worrying about escalation. Jennifer Wu had commented, "Whoever did this, it is not helpful. This is technically vandalism and it gives Brenda ammunition." She was right. As much as I disliked Brenda's behavior, this was too far. Someone had crossed the line from justified protest into harassment. I posted a comment saying exactly that, and several others agreed. About an hour later, a Minneapolis police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. My stomach dropped. A uniformed officer got out and walked up to the porch. I opened the door before he could knock. "Jake Lancaster?" the officer asked. He was a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense expression. "That is me. I am Officer Davis. I am investigating a vandalism complaint from one of your neighbors." "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course. Come in." Officer Davis stepped inside and I offered him coffee, which he declined. We sat in the living room while he pulled out a notebook. "I am guessing this is about the boot trays," I said. "You are aware of the incident?" "I saw the photos online. Look, officer, I know there has been tension between me and Brenda Patterson lately, but I had nothing to do with that. I was home all night. My wife can confirm it." "I am sure she can," Officer Davis said with a slight smile. "Mr. Lancaster, I am not here because I think you did it. I am here because Miss Patterson seems to think you did, and I am obligated to follow up on the complaint. Between you and me, I have been to Meadowbrook Estates plenty of times over the years for HOA disputes. This is far from the worst I have seen." "Really?" "Oh yeah. There was a neighborhood over in Edna where the HOA president slashed someone's tires because they planted the wrong type of shrubs. Another place in Bloomington where board members were embezzling dues for personal vacations. Compared to that, boot trays are pretty tame." Despite the situation, I laughed. Officer Davis closed his notebook. "Here is my advice off the record. Let this die down. Do not engage with Miss Patterson, do not post about her online, and definitely do not retaliate for anything she might do. Most of these HOA conflicts resolve themselves once people stop adding fuel to the fire." "I can do that," I said. "Good. Also, I took a look at your front porch on my way in. You have got a boot tray just inside the door now, right?" "Yeah, learned my lesson about keeping it outside." Officer Davis nodded. "Smart. My wife and I have the same setup. Anyone who thinks you should not have a boot tray in Minnesota has never actually lived through a real winter." After he left, I felt a strange sense of relief. The police visit had actually been reassuring. But the boot tray incident at Brenda's house had shifted something in the neighborhood dynamic. The Facebook group became flooded with speculation about who had done it. Some people thought it was hilarious and called the perpetrator a hero. Others worried it had gone too far. A few people even suggested it might have been Brenda herself, trying to make me look bad. That theory gained traction when someone pointed out that the boot trays in the photos were all brand new and identical, suggesting someone had bought them in bulk. Who would spend hundreds of dollars on a prank unless they had an ulterior motive? I did not know what to believe. All I knew was that I wanted the whole thing to be over. A week later, Robert Chen called a special board meeting. This time, the announcement specifically stated that the board would be discussing new enforcement procedures and reviewing Brenda's resignation. Sarah and I debated whether to attend, but ultimately decided we should. Jennifer encouraged us to come as well. The turnout was smaller this time, maybe 20 people. Brenda was not there. Robert and Amanda sat at the front table, along with a third person I did not recognize. Robert called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "First, I want to address the elephant in the room. Brenda Patterson submitted her official resignation as HOA president last week. The board has accepted it." A few people clapped. Robert held up a hand. "That said, we need to make sure we are not replacing one problem with another. The board has been doing a thorough review of all enforcement actions taken over the past year. We have identified several fines that were either improperly assessed or excessive. Those fines are being refunded, including Mr. Lancaster's." I felt Sarah squeeze my hand. It was not about the money, but it was vindicating to hear the board acknowledge they had been wrong. "Going forward," Robert continued, The board will be implementing a new 3-step enforcement process. First, a friendly warning letter explaining the alleged violation and how to fix it. Second, if the issue is not resolved within 30 days, a formal notice with a potential fine. Third, if necessary, a hearing before the full board before any fine is actually assessed. No more unilateral enforcement actions. Amanda spoke up next. We are also forming a community standards committee made up of volunteers from the neighborhood. This committee will help review complaints and provide input on whether something is truly a violation or just normal homeownership. We want enforcement to be reasonable and consistent. It sounded like real change. Several people asked questions about specifics, and the board answered them patiently. The whole tone was different from the previous meeting, less confrontational, more collaborative. At the end of the meeting, Robert asked if anyone had information about the boot tray vandalism at Brenda's house. Nobody spoke up. He sighed. Look, I understand there has been a lot of frustration, but vandalism is not the answer. If anyone knows anything, please come talk to me or Amanda privately. We want to move forward, not escalate. As we walked to the car, Jennifer caught up with us. That was about as good an outcome as we could have hoped for, she said. You think it will stick? I asked. Or will they just elect another Brenda in 6 months? That is up to all of you. If people stay engaged and involved, it will stick. If everyone checks out and stops paying attention, someone like Brenda will eventually take over again. That is how it always works. She was right, of course. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention to HOA business. I volunteered for the new standards committee, along with 6 other neighbors including Patricia Holden and Tom Henderson. We met twice a month to review complaints and make recommendations to the board. Most of the issues were genuinely trivial. Someone complained that a neighbor's house numbers were too small. Another person reported a mailbox that was slightly crooked. We rejected almost all of them, recommending that the board send friendly reminder letters at most. But we also identified a few legitimate concerns, like a house where the landscaping had become genuinely overgrown and was attracting rodents, or another where holiday lights had been left up so long they were falling apart. The committee worked. Slowly, the tone in the neighborhood shifted. People were less afraid of getting random fines, and complaints became less frequent. The Facebook group evolved from a place to vent about HOA overreach into something more positive, with neighbors sharing recommendations for contractors and organizing social events. I barely thought about Brenda anymore, until one Saturday in early April when I was outside raking leftover leaves from the fall that had been buried under snow all winter. A white Mercedes SUV pulled up to the curb in front of my house. My first instinct was to go inside, but then I saw that Brenda looked different. She was not wearing her usual expensive clothes and perfect makeup. She looked tired. She got out of the car slowly and walked up my driveway. I leaned on my rake and waited. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, stopping about 10 feet away. "I owe you an apology. I was so surprised I did not know what to say. I have been thinking a lot over the past 2 months," she continued, "about how I handled things as HOA president, about the boot tray situation specifically. You were right. I was wrong. I let my desire for control override common sense, and I hurt a lot of people in the process." "Thank you for saying that," I replied carefully. Brenda looked down at her shoes. "I want you to know I did not vandalize my own property. I genuinely thought you had done it, but I realized later that made no sense. The police never found out who it was." "It was not me," I said, "but for what it is worth, I did not think it was funny. That crossed a line." "It did." She paused. "I also want to explain something, though it does not excuse my behavior. My husband left me about a year ago. We had been together for 23 years, and he just walked out one day. I threw myself into the HOA because it was something I could control when everything else in my life felt chaotic, but I took it too far, way too far. I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. I am sorry about your husband. Thank you. Anyway, I did not come here looking for forgiveness or even friendship. I just wanted you to know that I understand I was wrong and I am genuinely sorry for how I treated you and your wife. This is for the boot tray. She held out an envelope. Inside was $80 in cash. You do not have to, I started. Yes, I do. 75 for the fine and 15 to replace the boot tray I threw away. It is the least I can do. I took the envelope. Thank you, Brenda, I appreciate it. She nodded and turned to leave, then paused. The neighborhood looks good, by the way. I drive through sometimes. Robert and Amanda are doing a much better job than I ever did. Less enforcement, more community. That is what it should have been all along. I watched her drive away, and I realized that I did not feel angry anymore. Just sad for her, and glad that she seemed to be finding some perspective. That evening, Sarah and I sat on our back deck with glasses of wine, watching the sunset. The weather was finally warming up, and our neighbors were outside too, doing yard work and walking dogs. Across the street, Tom Henderson waved. 2 houses down, Patricia Holden was planting flowers in her garden. Did you ever think when we moved here that we would end up in an HOA civil war? Sarah asked. Not even slightly. I thought the biggest challenge would be shoveling the driveway. She laughed. So do you regret buying the house? I thought about it. The past few months had been stressful and frustrating, but they had also brought our neighbors together in a way that probably never would have happened otherwise. The neighborhood felt like an actual community now, not just a collection of houses bound by arbitrary rules. No, I said. I do not regret it. We made this place better. We did. And all because of a $15 boot tray. The boot tray that launched 1,000 complaints. Sarah raised her glass. To boot trays, the unsung heroes of Minnesota winters. I clinked my glass against hers. To boot trays. The next HOA meeting was in May. Spring had fully arrived and the neighborhood looked beautiful with flowers blooming and grass turning green again. Robert announced that they had successfully recruited 2 new board members to fill the empty seats after Brenda's resignation. One was Jennifer Wu, the property attorney who had helped me. The other was a retired teacher named Marcus Green, who had lived in Meadowbrook Estates for 15 years. The meeting was brief and uneventful, which felt like a victory in itself. The board discussed the budget for summer landscaping, approved plans for the neighborhood block party in July, and addressed exactly 0 petty complaints about boot trays or garden hoses or mailbox colors. After the meeting, several neighbors went to a nearby restaurant for drinks. It became an impromptu celebration of the new era of reasonable HOA governance. Tom Henderson bought a round for everyone. Patricia Holden gave a toast about community cooperation that was funny and heartfelt. I found myself genuinely enjoying the company of these people who had been strangers 6 months ago. Jennifer pulled me aside at one point. You know, I have been practicing property law for 12 years, and I have dealt with a lot of HOA disputes. Most of them do not end this well. What makes them end badly? I asked. Usually, people just give up. They pay the fines, follow the unreasonable rules, and resent their neighbors. The HOA becomes this oppressive force that everyone hates but nobody challenges. What you did, standing up at that meeting, it gave everyone else permission to speak up too. That is rare. I just wanted my boot tray back, she smiled. Sometimes the smallest things spark the biggest changes. As summer progressed, life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The neighborhood block party in July was a huge success, with over 100 people showing up. Kids played in the street while adults grilled food and caught up on gossip. Robert set up a dunk tank and volunteered to be the first target, which everyone appreciated. Even Amanda Foster participated enthusiastically, organizing games and activities. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs when a family I did not recognize approached. They were young, probably in their late 20s, and they had a toddler with them. "Are you Jake Lancaster?" The husband asked. "That is me. I am David Morris. My wife and I just closed on a house here last week, number 42 Birch Lane. During the walkthrough, 3 different neighbors told us we had to meet you, something about boot trays." I laughed and told him the whole story while his burgers cooked. By the end, he and his wife were both grinning. "That is amazing," David said. "So the HOA is actually reasonable now, very reasonable. Just do not leave your garbage cans out for 3 weeks straight or let your yard turn into a jungle, and you will be fine. Normal homeowner stuff." His wife, Kelly, looked relieved. "That is so good to hear. We almost did not buy here because we heard horror stories about HOA nightmares. But everyone we have met so far has been wonderful." "That is what it is like now," I said, handing them their burgers. "Welcome to the neighborhood." Throughout the summer and into fall, I occasionally thought about Brenda. I never saw her at neighborhood events, though I sometimes spotted her white Mercedes driving through the streets. I wondered if she was doing okay, if she had found other ways to fill her time, if she still resented how everything had ended. I got my answer in October. Sarah came home from the grocery store one afternoon with surprising news. "I ran into Brenda at Target," she said. "How was that?" "Actually, it was nice. We talked for a few minutes. She asked how you were doing. She said she started volunteering at an animal shelter, and she is taking art classes at the community college. She seemed good, Jake, like genuinely happier than she was when she was running the HOA. That is good to hear. She also said to tell you thank you." "For what?" "She said losing the HOA presidency was the best thing that could have happened to her. It forced her to reevaluate her priorities and figure out what she actually cared about. Apparently, it is not boot trays and mailbox colors." I smiled. It was a surprising ending to the whole saga, but a good one. The following February, exactly 1 year after the boot tray incident, another major snowstorm hit Minneapolis. I was shoveling the driveway when Tom Henderson walked over from across the street. "Can you believe it has been a year?" he asked, leaning on his shovel. "Since what?" "Since Brenda stole your boot tray. I was thinking about it this morning. This whole crazy year started because of a boot tray. I looked at my front porch where my boot tray sat just inside the door, exactly where it was supposed to be. It is weird how things work out. You know what the wildest part is?" Tom said. "Property values in the neighborhood actually went up. I checked the comparables last month because I was curious. Turns out a reasonable HOA is better for home values than an obsessive one. Who knew?" "Jennifer probably could have told us that." "Yeah, but she is too smart. She would have used big words." We finished shoveling in companionable silence, waving to neighbors as they passed by. The street was alive with activity, people clearing snow and kids building snowmen. It felt like a real community, the kind of place where people looked out for each other instead of constantly looking for violations. That evening, the neighborhood Facebook group posted a reminder about the upcoming annual HOA meeting where board elections would take place. Robert had indicated he wanted to step down as president but would stay on the board. Jennifer was being encouraged to run for president, though she had not committed yet. I considered running myself but ultimately decided against it. I had served on the standards committee for a year, and had learned that HOA work was mostly tedious administrative tasks with occasional moments of interpersonal drama. It was important work, but it was not something I wanted to take on full time. Instead, I focused on being an engaged community member. I attended meetings, volunteered for neighborhood events, and made an effort to welcome new residents. The Morris family with the toddler had become good friends. We had them over for dinner regularly, and our wives had bonded over their shared love of hiking. In March, Jennifer did agree to run for HOA president, and she was elected unanimously. Her first act was to create a neighborhood newsletter, distributed both digitally and in print, to keep everyone informed about HOA business. It was exactly the kind of transparency that had been missing during Brenda's tenure. Life moved on. Sarah got a promotion at her job. I took on a major project at work that kept me busy through the spring. We planted a garden in the backyard, and I built a small deck where we could sit and enjoy summer evenings. The neighborhood thrived. One Saturday in May, I was at the hardware store picking up supplies for a fence repair when I ran into Brenda. We had not spoken since her apology visit over a year ago. She was pushing a cart full of gardening supplies and paint brushes. "Jake," she said, seeming genuinely pleased to see me. "How are you?" "I am good, Brenda. How about you?" "Really good, actually. I am redoing my living room, finally getting rid of that white carpet." I could not help but laugh. "Probably a good call in Minnesota." "Yeah, I do not know what I was thinking with that. I am putting in hardwood floors." "Much more practical." She paused. "I heard Jennifer is doing a great job as president." "She really is. The newsletter is a big hit." "That is wonderful. The neighborhood seems happy. I see people outside more, talking to each other. It is nice to see." We chatted for a few more minutes about inconsequential things, the kind of small talk you make with someone who used to be an adversary but is now just another neighbor. When we parted ways, I felt a sense of closure. That evening, I told Sarah about the encounter while we sat on our back deck watching the sunset. "It is funny how things come full circle," she said. "A year ago you were enemies. Now you are on speaking terms. We are not friends exactly, but yeah, we are okay." Do you think she really learned something from all this? I considered the question. I think she did. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can change. For Brenda, that rock bottom was the whole neighborhood turning against her. It forced her to look at herself honestly. "That is very philosophical of you. I've had a year to think about it." Sarah smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know what I realized today? I cannot remember the last time we got an HOA violation notice, or even a reminder about anything. That is because Jennifer runs things the way they should be run. Focus on the big stuff, let the small stuff go. It is almost boring now. Good boring, though. The best kind of boring." The summer passed peacefully. The neighborhood pool opened for the season, and families gathered there most weekends. The 4th of July block party was even bigger than the previous year. Jennifer started a community garden in the common area near the front entrance, and a dozen families signed up for plots. I planted tomatoes and peppers in my assigned space. Tom Henderson took the plot next to mine and planted enough zucchini to feed the entire neighborhood twice over. We joked that we should start a farmer's market, but really, we just enjoyed having a reason to be outside and interact with neighbors. One afternoon in August, while I was watering my tomato plants, a car pulled up and a young couple got out. They looked around the neighborhood with the expression that people get when they are house shopping, that mixture of hope and careful evaluation. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "Do you live here?" "I do," I said, walking over. "What is it like?" "We are thinking about putting an offer on a house on Maple Drive, but we have heard horror stories about HOAs and we wanted to get a resident's perspective." I thought about everything that had happened over the past 18 months. The frustration, the conflict, the eventual resolution. The way a community had come together to demand better. The friendships that had formed. The lessons everyone had learned about standing up for what was right. "It is a good neighborhood," I said. "The HOA used to be pretty strict, but it has gotten a lot better. Now it is focused on maintaining property values and organizing community events, not nickeling and diming people over petty stuff." "So you would recommend it?" "I would, but here is my advice. If you move here, stay involved. Go to the meetings, join a committee if you can. HOAs are only as good as the people who participate in them. If you check out and let other people run everything, you might not like the results." The couple thanked me and walked back to their car. I watched them drive away, hoping they would make an offer. They seemed like the kind of people who would fit in well here. That night, I sat down and did something I had been thinking about for months. I wrote out the whole story of the boot tray incident and everything that followed. Not for publication or anything formal, just for my own record. I wanted to remember what had happened, how a single moment of absurdity had sparked real change. As I typed, I realized the story was not really about a boot tray at all. It was about community, about standing up to petty tyranny, about the importance of reasonable governance. It was about how ordinary people could push back against unreasonable authority when they decided they had had enough. It was also about forgiveness and growth. Brenda had made mistakes, serious ones, but she had owned them and worked to become better. The neighborhood had been angry, but we had channeled that anger into productive change rather than destructive revenge. Well, except for whoever dumped all those boot trays on her lawn, but that was a different story. I finished writing around midnight. Sarah had gone to bed hours ago, but I stayed up, wanting to get all the details down while they were fresh in my mind. When I finally saved the document and shut down my computer, I felt satisfied. This was a story worth remembering. The next morning was Sunday. Sarah and I went to brunch at a cafe downtown, then stopped by the farmer's market. It was a perfect late summer day, warm but not hot, with a light breeze that made everything feel alive. As we walked through the market, looking at produce and handmade crafts, I thought about how much my life had changed since moving to Meadowbrook Estates. I had never expected to become an activist or a community organizer. I had just wanted a nice house in a safe neighborhood, but life had pushed me into something more and I was better for it. We bought fresh flowers and some vegetables, then drove home. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed that someone had left something on our front porch. My first thought was that it was a package, but as I got closer, I realized it was a boot tray. A brand new, high-quality rubber boot tray with a note attached. I picked up the note and read it aloud to Sarah. "Jake, thank you for making this neighborhood a better place. You stood up when it mattered and we all benefited from it. Here is to practical solutions and common sense. Your neighbors." The note was signed by at least 20 people, including Robert, Amanda, Jennifer, Tom, Patricia, and many others. Sarah smiled and wiped her eyes. "That is really sweet," she said. "Yeah, it is." I carried the boot tray inside and set it next to my existing one. 2 boot trays felt excessive, but I would figure out what to do with the extra one later. For now, it was just nice to know that people appreciated what had happened. The final HOA meeting of the year was in November. Jennifer gave a comprehensive report on the state of the neighborhood. Finances were solid, maintenance was up to date, and resident satisfaction was at an all-time high according to a survey the board had conducted. There were no outstanding complaints or violations. 0. For the first time in the recorded history of Meadowbrook Estates, the neighborhood had gone an entire month without a single resident being fined or warned about anything. Jennifer attributed this to the new approach of treating residents like adults and focusing on genuine problems rather than arbitrary aesthetic standards. She thanked the Standards Committee, specifically calling out the work that Tom, Patricia, and I had done. People applauded. At the end of the meeting, Robert stood up to say a few words. He looked emotional. When I joined this board 5 years ago, I thought the job was about enforcing rules and collecting dues. Over the past 2 years, I learned it is actually about building community, about helping neighbors connect with each other and take pride in where they live. I want to thank everyone in this room for teaching me that lesson, especially Jake Lancaster, who had the courage to push back when things got out of hand. This neighborhood is better because of people like him. More applause. I felt my face turn red. Sarah squeezed my hand. After the meeting, as people were filing out, Brenda walked in. She had not attended an HOA meeting since her resignation, and her presence caused a moment of surprised silence. She looked nervous. "I am sorry to interrupt," she said. "I just wanted to say something, if that is okay." Jennifer nodded. "Of course, Brenda. Please." Brenda stood at the front of the room and took a deep breath. "I know I do not have the right to take up your time anymore, but I wanted to say in front of everyone that I am sorry. I abused my position as president. I treated people unfairly. I made this neighborhood a stressful place to live when it should have been a home. I am truly sorry for that." The room was quiet. Then Patricia Holden stood up. "Brenda, thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when you are wrong. I appreciate the apology." Tom Henderson stood next. "I appreciate it too." Water under the bridge. One by one, people stood and acknowledged Brenda's apology. By the end, nearly everyone in the room was standing. Brenda looked overwhelmed with emotion. She wiped her eyes and nodded. "Thank you, all of you. This neighborhood is lucky to have the leadership it has now. Jennifer, Robert, Amanda, you are all doing a wonderful job. Keep it up." She left quickly before the emotion could fully overwhelm her, but the gesture had meant something. It had brought real closure to a difficult chapter. Sarah and I walked home under the November stars, our breath visible in the cold air. Winter was coming again, which meant snow and slush and cold temperatures. But this time, I was ready. I had my boot trays, plural now, and I had a neighborhood full of people who understood that practical solutions were not violations of community standards. They were just common sense. "You think we will ever have another HOA drama?" Sarah asked as we climbed the steps to our front porch. "I hope not, but if we do, at least I know the neighbors will have my back." "That is true. You are like the neighborhood hero now, Jake Lancaster, defender of boot trays everywhere. Please do not make that my legacy." She laughed and kissed me. "Too late. That is definitely going on your tombstone." We went inside, and I looked at the boot trays by the door. 2 of them now, sitting side by side. One was the replacement I had bought after Brenda threw away the original. The other was the gift from the neighbors. They were just cheap rubber trays, mass-produced and utilitarian. But they represented something bigger. They represented a community that had learned to value common sense over arbitrary rules. They represented neighbors who looked out for each other. They represented the idea that ordinary people could push back against unreasonable authority and win. I thought about the past 18 months, about everything that had happened because of one woman's overreach and one man's refusal to just accept it. The confrontations, the meetings, the resolution, the growth. It had been exhausting and frustrating, but also meaningful in a way I had not expected. Sometimes the most important battles are fought over the smallest things. Sometimes standing up for a $15 boot tray means standing up for the principle that people deserve to be treated with respect and common sense. Sometimes one person's courage to say, "No, "This is not right," can inspire an entire community to demand better. As I got ready for bed that night, I realized I was not angry anymore. Not at Brenda, not at the HOA, not at any of it. The story had reached its natural conclusion. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and everyone had moved forward. It was exactly the ending I had hoped for, even if I could not have predicted it 18 months ago, when I first saw Brenda standing on my porch with my boot tray in her hands. I fell asleep that night thinking about how strange life could be. How a simple decision to buy a house in a nice neighborhood could lead to becoming an accidental activist. How a boot tray could become a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny. How conflict could ultimately strengthen a community rather than divide it. The next morning, I woke up to the first real snowfall of the season. 3 inches had accumulated overnight, and more was coming down. I got dressed and went outside to shovel the driveway. Across the street, Tom was already out doing the same. 2 houses down, David Morris was teaching his toddler how to make a snowman. After finishing my driveway, I cleared the sidewalk in front of my house and then kept going, clearing the sidewalk for 3 more houses. It was something I had started doing last winter, just being a good neighbor. Tom saw what I was doing and did the same on his side of the street. Within an hour, the entire block had cleared sidewalks, everyone pitching in to help each other. That is what a real community looks like, I thought. Not perfect lawns and identical mailboxes enforced by threat of fines. But neighbors helping neighbors. People looking out for each other. Common sense and kindness prevailing over petty rules. I went inside, stomped the snow off my boots onto my boot tray, and poured myself a hot cup of coffee. Through the kitchen window, I watched the neighborhood come to life. Kids playing in the snow, adults clearing driveways, dogs bounding through the fresh powder. This was home. Not because of the HOA or in spite of it, but because of the people who lived here. People who had learned that standing together was better than standing alone. People who understood that rules should serve the community, not the other way around. And it had all started with a boot tray. I smiled and raised my coffee mug in a silent toast. To boot trays, to reasonable HOAs, to neighbors who have your back. To standing up for what is right, even when it is just about something small. To happy endings that you have to fight for, to home,